Hello, everyone. Terry Earthwind with another Daily Six series live with the author of Daily Six and my co-host and co-pilot, John Chappelear, and our special guest, Sophie Jacobs. Sophie, welcome.
Thanks so much, Terry and John, for hosting me with this special topic.
Well, this
Well,
is
we're
an
really excited.
exciting topic, John.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited that you're here, Sophia. The idea of some sort of quiet time. It wasn't trying to be dictatorial about it's got to be like this, because that usually pushes more people away than brings them in. But the idea was just, I mean, for me, I kind of grew up with this gerbil in a wheel running as fast as possible, and that was the only way you could be successful. The idea of sharpening the saw, or slowing down or taking breaks, or even naps nowadays are sort of encouraging it. And just something to sort of break up this, I don't know, a gerbil wheel of life, to use the same analogy two times, but it was just like fast equals success. And if you could move fast, you were going to end up successful. And if you couldn't move fast, you're going to get left behind. Sort of that only the lead dog gets the view kind of mindset. And when I got my gift of devastation, which is when you have something that happens that's horrible in your life, but eventually pushes good things into your life. When I had that, all the things I thought were important to me were sort of taken away involuntarily. And so I thought, if I was going to rebuild my life, let's do it on a different set of principles. And that's sort of where the Daily Six evolved from. And it was interesting because I finally got to a point where I realized what I was doing in meditation was setting my heart and my mind, align that with an intention for the day. And I know that's a lot more complicated than just focusing on your breathing, but setting my heart and my mind in the right direction. And I realized when I do that, my life tended to follow. And it didn't require any long PhDs and anything else other than learning to just sit, be quiet, which is not something that I was ever comfortable doing, as you can tell from my introduction. So tell me a little bit about what you do and your background, and how this fits into your life.
Yeah, John. Well, thanks so much for that brief glimpse into our topic. I already had like a bunch of popcorned ideas, like, oh, I could, I want to talk about this, want to talk about that. But I think it's important to establish, well, who is this Sophie Jacobs? What am I about? So similar to you, John, there was I don't remember quite how you said it just now, but in Buddhism, they call it heavenly messenger, where you get the gift of something not working out, the gift of loss. And that happened to me not just once, but it kind of happened in a succession all at the same time. So when COVID happened, I had just graduated college, or I was in the process of graduating. So I was becoming kind of an adult in the world. And already with that comes some uncertainty of like,
Sure.
what am I doing? And then the pandemic hit, and it was really like, okay, what am I doing? And I followed a path that I thought would work for me, in terms of, well, one of my friends was building a startup and she just invited me onto the team. And so it was just an opportunity that was handed in my lap, essentially. Very privileged to have that opportunity, but really, I felt some sort of inner discord with the work I was doing out in the world and how that resonated within me. I didn't really have the language for it. But then, as I just talked about this boom, 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 like heavenly messengers moment, my house burned down. And
Well, there's a heavenly
yeah,
messenger.
yeah, there's a heavenly messenger for you. Yeah, my house burned down and I was home alone at the time. And part of that story is I was home alone and I had an intuition that I needed to leave before anyone kind of gave me the go ahead. So that was a huge kind of like foundational shift in my life of not only just being houseless, but the knowing that following that gut hunch, um, actually saved my life.
Mm.
And so from that came a sense of urgency to the question of like, what really matters here?
Mm.
What really matters here? And so that question led me to quit my job. So I quit my job, my house burned down, and I had just gotten out of a relationship. And I was just a college graduate, and we were in the pandemic, and it was just like this colossal burn up, burn out in my life. And
Wow.
I can see it now as being such a profound gift, because what it really allowed me was kind of the, when they do prescribed burns, you have the now the nutrients in the soil to grow something beautiful. And I knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to spiritual path. Meditation
Mm.
was something that actually became is something really important and foundational for me over the past few years coming into that pandemic. And once all of it was gone, it was just like the question, what matters is actually, I need some alone time. And not just alone time. I want some sort of mental training.
Mm.
I want to be able to go to a monastery and cultivate my mind, refine my mindfulness in a way that will set up the rest of my life, like a foundation. So that's what I did. I ended up going to a monastery. I lived there for about a year, and then for 3 months I ordained as a nun. And that experience really did bring to me the forefront and the focus of what it means to not only have quiet time, but like how to use it wisely and
Mm.
the importance of it. Because like you said, John, we live in a culture that values our busyness at
Yes.
the expense of a deeper truth.
Right.
So
Well, I agree with
that's a
that.
little bit of my story. Yeah.
And you're sticking to it.
Wow.
Yeah. I am.
Terry, what do you got there?
Fabulous. Fabulous story. And I've heard it before. And, I'm big on quiet time myself. I go into a self meditation a couple of times a day, and really centers me, gets me rolling for the day. As John knows, and Sophie, you do too now. I nap almost every day, and I've been doing it all my adult life. So it's not because I'm 70 years old. It's because I get some amazing mental feedback from something I'm thinking seriously about. I'll lay down for that nap for an hour, hour and a half. And within minutes of waking up, whatever it was I was thinking of, I've got an answer for it,
Right.
and an action plan. It's crazy, but that's the way it works. And quiet time doesn't have to be yoga for 2 hours or anything like that. It's just that centering, that connected to self is so important, John.
I mean, absolutely. The thing I said earlier, Sophie, was a gift of devastation. And, it's a gift you'd like to be able to return, but there's no returns allowed. So you just have to learn from the ashes what you can do as you move forward. And when I mention this in keynotes or in training, and then I usually say, how many people have had that kind of an experience? And almost everybody raises their hand. I'm always amazed. You sort of think I must be the only guy that's ever had to struggle with this. And then I also ask, well, how many people would say that things are better because of that than they were before? And almost everybody else raises their hand again, because if you give yourself a chance to enjoy the process, or at least live through the process and look positively towards the future, it almost forces you to sort of develop a level of, even if it's, sort of an initiate level of spirituality, it just sort of forces you to notice the life that could be in front of you, rather than just going back to the old hustle, 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 because that's what I was going to do. And I did. I started 2 more companies before I sort of started doing this full time, but they were much different companies and much smaller and much more sort of boutique focused, rather than the other company. It was like 400 employees and 12 locations and 24 hours a day. And, it's just, and I was 30, kind of thing. So it was really devastating to lose that after, when I was in my early 40s. But this new path, I ended up at a workshop called Living from the Heart, I think it was called, or something. And the idea was, well, tell me what the most important component of your life is. And the most important component was living according to spiritual values that I had sort of created. I didn't think any of the stuff in the book up. I mean, I certainly didn't think of quiet time as, wow, nobody ever said that before. It's just quiet time and love and forgiveness and gratitude and taking action, and the things that sort of help keep me on the right path all the time. And then it was like, what did you enjoy doing the most in your whole life? And the thing I enjoyed most was I was a singer in a rock and roll band for 6 years. And it was great. I had a little more hair in those days, but it was the most fun. I would have been happy to do that. That's like when you talk to somebody who just skis for a living or something. It was just great. There's no sense of work associated with it at all. And so I thought to myself, well, if I can find a way to speak about spiritual values, sort of like being in the stage, like a lead singer, then maybe this would be the great combination of the two. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to take the things that were important to me and use it in a medium that I'm very comfortable being in. I never saw a spotlight I didn't love. So, but Terry, I think you can relate to that a little bit, just the enjoyment of being on a stage. But I've never ever, I've run a bunch of companies with hundreds and hundreds of employees, and I never had one person send me a note that said, what you did today changed my life. And yet I get those all the time now, and it's a much better feeling than thinking your gross income goes up 15 or 20%. I mean, it's just a whole different way to value your life. And if it's just a still single level of exchange between, I'll give you hours, you give me money, if that's the whole thing, then it really is a very limited way to live. I think so anyway.
Right on,
Yeah,
right on.
absolutely.
Our bread and butter for Evolutionary Healer up until the COVID was me on stage, and I love it up there. Absolutely love that interchange and the energy that you can't get right here online. Even though I have felt it a number of times when I'm giving lectures or just keynote right here. The largest number I had was 1,124 people were on this call. I couldn't see it. I wasn't even aware of it until afterwards. It was like I'm talking to a few people, and I was just enjoying myself. And when it was all over, I just, I was talking to the host who brought me on, and we were off air. And I said, you know what? That was just so dynamic. How many people were there? Because I just felt like all this energy. And he says, 1,124. And I went, where were they? And he says, this mega screen has everybody on it. There's like 4 screens of 300 or something like that, right? And I go, wow, that's really interesting. And that was the first time that I'd ever been online doing that type of presentation where I actually felt something. I felt there was some energy there, and it was quite exciting. Sophie, you do a little bit of talking. What do you think?
Well, you got that
Yeah,
wonderful book.
well,
Make sure you mention the book.
oh yeah. Well, I just think that something that came to mind for me in terms of what you two were sharing is this aspect of being able to do almost doing something but having a different relationship to it, and how much like taking time to be quiet with yourself can actually um change that relationship from the inside out. So you both are in business, but your relationship to what you're doing and how you're offering yourselves to people, it sounds like has taken a fundamentally radical shift from how you first began. And John, I can't help but keep envisioning this simile that you raised in the very beginning, of sharpening the saw, because I find it interesting how when we think about like sharpening the saw, there's actually a refining process going on where we're narrowing our attention and our focus. So it's
Mhm.
not just that like the saw, like we just gotta like keep cutting down things and like keep producing and stuff, but the saw itself needs to be refined, needs
Mhm.
to be single pointed. And how do we do that? Well, we have to come back into ourselves. We have to develop that one pointedness, that concentration that allows us to see things clearly. And when we can see things clearly, that clarity can cut through a
Mhm.
lot of the noise and actually produce value. And so it sounds like that's what you, John, and Terry are doing. And John, it seems like, you know, even when you were sharing how you had this like, you know, big business and then you pivoted and how so many people now are telling you, wow, this changed my life. It sounds like you kind of like narrowed
Yes.
in
Yeah.
on some serum of truth that you could offer to people. And I just feel like sharing that, like that quiet time can be a support, a tool, an assistance to kind of concentrate that quality of truth, to
Mhm.
cut the distraction, because we do live in a world that is just rife with it. And so yeah, that was a really important theme for me to develop on my journey of just like really distilling what the
Mhm.
truth was for me. And it's an ongoing investigation, and it's one that for me is just very present oriented. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily tied to a story and narrative, but it's tied to what is the experience like in this present moment. Um, and it's interesting how quiet time, like you can have physical solitude, but you can
Mhm.
also have mental solitude. And that sort of mental solitude where there's really, it's just a state of receptivity where there's not a lot of thought going on.
Mhm.
That also gives a clarity to then, you know, then flow into an action that is aligned, that does make sense. So it's not about being completely passive and just like having all the quiet time you want,
Right.
but it's using that to then like bring your gifts out into the world. And that's what I did. So I, like, while I was at the monastery as a nun, I had a lot of quiet time, and what emerged from that period of inner silence was I need to write a book. And not
Mm.
just I need to write a book, I need to write a book about intuition, inner knowing, inner wisdom. What is this inner quality of being that that generates peace within ourselves?
Mhm.
And where do I place my trust? Do I place my trust on the people I'm around, like the nuns? Do I place my trust on the Buddha? Do I place my trust just in myself? Do I place my trust in my friends? You know, this is a very, I think it's a question that a lot of young adults, I think, grapple with, but people in
Mm.
general, like, where do we place our trust? And that was a really big theme that I was tackling in my life at the time. And having that inner silence, having that quiet time, let my mind settle enough so that the next thing emerged in the right time and so that I could truly hear it. So that I could hear that subtlety of, what if I just wrote a book? And so I did. So the next
Just,
2 years,
just wrote a book. It's a piece of cake.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. So I think quiet time was just a crucial aspect of my journey of really, again, when we think about like even just sharpening the axe to really get one pointed in what really matters, where do I place my trust, and how do I go forward with this? Not that I will know like the entirety of the path, but what's the next breadcrumb? And
Right.
silence helps me listen to that subtlety in the next breadcrumb, because
Right.
sometimes it can be quite subtle, and if we're so distracted by the ping pong of noise,
Hmm.
we might not be able to discern it quite clearly.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it really is a key to being able to create. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Concentric Perspective, and the idea of things have to come from here out, not from here in. And so it's one of the phrases that I've started using a long time ago now was it's not so much what's in it for me, because that used to be my whole perspective is, what am I getting out of this? Otherwise, I'm not bothering with it if there's nothing coming this way, versus what is in it from me? What am I putting into the relationships of my life? What am I putting into each day to make me a better person? Questions that I would have never asked before, like, how could I be a better husband? And I guarantee you, I got a long-winded answer to that. It wasn't like, oh, honey, you're just perfect. Don't worry about a thing. And asking your kids, what do I look like when I'm angry? I'm sure that you can't. And they look exactly like me when I'm angry. I mean, we put out so many images of ourselves physically and emotionally. I was just talking to Linda earlier about a situation with my girls when they were little, which was they would come over to visit the house, but I was divorced from my first wife, and they would come over, and I just, it was an uncomfortable situation. So I was just sort of treating it, I don't know if I was treating them like a customer or whatever it was, but I wasn't treating them like loving children. So I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a Episcopal priest, and I said, my kids come over, they don't even hug me. It's just, he said, well, do you hug them? And it's kind of like, oh yeah, I guess that would work too, wouldn't it? So it's all of a sudden, it's not their job to make me feel better. It's my job to make them feel welcome enough so that they want to reach out and do that. And that's not any different in a boardroom as it is kneeling down in the front yard welcoming your children. It's a matter of making them feel comfortable enough so that they trust you, because trust is the whole embodiment that we're trying to build in an organization or in a family or in any group. If without trust, nothing really is going to move forward. I mean, people just, they'll go through the motions, but it's really hard to build and very easy to lose. That's another one of those questions. How many people in here have ever had a boss tell them, trust me? And of course, and how many times has that been violated? And all the hands go up again. And I said, so how, the next time somebody says, trust me, what do you think of? And they go, this is all baloney. It's just never going to happen. So it has to be not words. It has to be action. It has to be behavior. And that's why my company is called Changing the Focus, because I don't want it to be this way anymore. I want it to be this way now. And what am I putting into these things? And if I'm doing that, it is never failed to make the relationship or the situation or the organization stronger. And that's because you do sort of create this, this pinpoint of focus, this, like the way in which, Taekwondo artists work with, very small hands or fingers to make huge changes because all their energy is focused in this one spot. And if we can bring that to life individually, so that I feel better, bring it into my family, bring it into my organization. These are just, it just changes the way in which everybody relates to everybody else. And when you can do it, and there's a lot of work to do it, but when you can do it, it makes so much difference. And it changes the stress levels in an organization or in a family dramatically.
Yeah. Well, folks, we're coming down to the end of today's live, and thank you for watching, for all of you that are out there. Maybe we can close out by giving you some ideas about what quiet time is for us, and maybe you can develop a quiet time for yourself. Sophie, what's an idea for you?
Well, I'm thinking about people with busy and stressful lives because, we can say, oh, go on a retreat, which I've been really fortunate to have done, and it's been really beneficial for me, but that's not always the case for some people. They have commitments in their lives. And so something actually one of the teachers at the last retreat I was on said that really stuck with me that I want to share is if you don't feel like you have any time in your schedule to have even a little bit of quiet time for yourself, spend some extra time in the bathroom. No one's going to ask you if why you were in the bathroom for longer. No one will do it. So if you need to go to the restroom and spend 5 extra minutes just taking a breath to yourself, that's one really simple way in which people won't bother you. People won't ask you why you were there for 5 extra minutes. But just don't underestimate the power and the importance of taking just 5 minutes out of your day for that silence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fabulous. John?
It's funny. I've told people that, okay, just go to the restroom, close the door, and sit down and just breathe. I also worked with a person who lives in one of these, 100-story buildings. I said, well, then get on the elevator and ride from 75 to 100 and then back to 75 and back to 100 and get yourself or physically move from wherever you are. If you're just walking around the building, if it's a circular building. But if you can physically get yourself out of the place in which you find yourself sort of stressed, that will really help a lot. A physical change helps a lot. For me, it's sort of traditional sitting quietly in the morning with just breathing. And then usually what will happen after a couple of minutes is I will think of something that I really like to change, or I'd like to work on, or I'd like to improve. And just bringing that thought or word into meditation helps me sort of work through the solution or the way in which I should handle it differently. I've told people before, if you just think of the intention that you'd like to have, sort of like your breadcrumbs you were talking about earlier, what would you like to have happen at the end of this phone call, at the end of this dinner with your family, at the end of this meeting with your executives? How would you like to be perceived at the end of the dinner, the meeting, the phone call? And then you've set a little path for yourself. Now you've got a chance to follow it. But if you don't set a path, you could end up anywhere. And that's what meditation has been able to give me, is a clear path to set my heart and my mind on every day.
Delightful. Delightful. Ladies and gentlemen, Quiet Time, the Daily 6 series live with John Chappelear, the author, and I'm your host, Ambassador Terry Earthwind Nichols, with our very special guest, Sophia Jacobs. Sophie, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for stopping by, even if it's the recording. Bye for now.